In the shadow of the Royal Albert Hall, welcome back to Proms Extra. I'm Katie Derham and I'm back with Proms Extra to cast a beady eye across everything in this year's BBC Proms 120th season. We might not have the Commonwealth Games inside our own Proms Stadium, the Royal College of Music, but for our first show we are definitely going global. Let the classical games begin. Hello and welcome to Proms Extra. We're back for our second series. As usual, we'll look over the highlights from the last 7 days of the Proms. Chord of the Week makes a comeback with our own MC, that's Master of Chords, David Owen Norris. We'll be previewing the week ahead and we might drop in a few musical surprises too. I couldn't do this without my studio guests, but before we meet them, let's take a look at week 1 of the Proms. And that was just the first week. So who are our guests on Proms Extra tonight? Well, first we have a world-renowned pianist, celebrated for her interpretations of Schubert and Mozart, who's performed on numerous occasions at the Proms. It's Imogen Cooper. Next on the sofa we have Grammy Award-winning choral composer and conductor. Fresh from taking part in the opening of the Commonwealth Games, it's Eric Whittaker. Our next sofa guest is a conductor in demand around the world when he's not being the musical director of the Halle Orchestra in Manchester. He is the elder statesman of the Proms, Sir Mark Elder. And to bring the show to a close, our final guest is a young man who made his Proms debut this week with the China Philharmonic Orchestra. Rising superstar Hao Chen Zhang performs exclusively for us on Proms Extra this evening. Well, welcome to all of you, and Imogen, the Proms. It is the classical music festival that just keeps on growing and growing, isn't it? It's
Completely extraordinary. I don't know any other festival like it in the world. And for a performer to walk onto that huge stage and be confronted, well, actually joined by an audience who is completely quiet and have an incredible concentration for listening. It brings a feeling of intimacy that you would never imagine that the hall being that size could bring, and it's a very, very special feeling indeed.
And Eric, you've now settled in the UK and you had your own prom a couple of years ago. Are you a convert?
Completely. I remember the night of my prom concert. It was a late night prom, so it was beginning at 10, and we were coming in the doors and thousands of attendees were coming out, and it felt there was this energy in the space around the hall that it felt like we were in the center of the universe of classical music. It was pretty thrilling.
Well, the Proms began with a work that isn't heard very often, but this year Elgar's The Kingdom had centre stage for the first night of the Proms. And Mark, you've won an award for your recording of The Kingdom with the Halle. Is it the right work to kick off the season, in your opinion?
Well, it's a great work. I think it's one of his greatest pieces. It's not as celebratory, it's not as full of fanfares and huge climaxes as the first night of the Proms normally is associated with. It's a meditative work, and I think one needs to be in touch with its spirituality, but not worried by its religiosity.
Let's see a clip now of The Kingdom as conducted by Sir Andrew Davis. The BBC Symphony Orchestra and Chorus and the BBC National Chorus of Wales with Sir Andrew Davis, and a very small excerpt there of Elgar's The Kingdom. I mean, Eric, it is an epic work, isn't it? 400 performers, I think, were on the stage at the Royal Albert Hall. Does it fill the hall for you?
Yeah, and we were talking before about, in some ways, it's the perfect piece for the Royal Albert Hall. It's, if I may say as an American, it seems quintessentially British, and the size and scope of it seems to fit the hall perfectly. Also, there's a tenderness and an intimacy to it that, for forces that size, I think is unusual and compelling. It's seductive.
So The Kingdom is part of a planned trilogy which included The Apostles. Would it be wrong to call this Elgar's Ring Cycle?
Yes, it would.
I won't then. Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's appropriate, because The Ring is a great heroic story over so many different layers of the earth and the heavens and underneath the earth. The whole conception of the Apostles and the Kingdom, which is the second part of a three-part work that he never finished, was enormous. And it was deeply personal, and it involved him in questioning his faith as well. And all that one finds in his music, all the neurosis, the insecurity, as well as the great broad sweeping melodies, of which there are many in the Kingdom.
And by the time he got to the Kingdom, he was struggling a bit with his own Catholicism, with his relationship with Catholicism, wasn't he?
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it must have, to give birth to this huge work must have actually been incredibly difficult.
Very, very hard indeed, and I think he put off writing it as long as he could. But actually, my experience is that one should not think too much about what a composer went through to produce a work, and not worry as you turn to the work, knowing about the pain that it needed to bring it to life. Just to read the score and to enjoy the music, and to try and sink yourself into the spirituality, because it is deeply spiritual music.
And Imogen, could you sink yourself into the music and enjoy it? Is it your cup of tea?
The idiom is difficult for me. My formative musical years were actually outside this country, so really a lot of Elgar's musical language is not a particularly natural one for me. The harmonic world, the orchestration, and it's very distinctive. I mean, if you turn on the radio and there's a piece of music, you know instantly if it's Elgar. I also was brought up as a Catholic. It was extremely important to me, and that was quite a few years ago, and the whole language to me now is a little bit difficult to understand, a little bit, it's probably my failing, but it's a little bit alien. But as Mark so rightly says, one probably shouldn't look at the institutionalized side, but see more what was the spirituality behind it, and that is no doubt the pull for many people of this work.
Well, amongst the many hundreds of thousands of people who watched the programme go out, watched that particular piece of music go out on the first night of the Proms, there was a great response. And people do have, of course, their own individual responses to it. There were lots of tweets which were very positive, but there was one which I must say I think you might perhaps agree with a little, Imogen. One said, "I don't get the BBC Proms. The songs have no rhyming in them. The bloke is basically singing the Bible." So make of that what you will. I mean, I don't know. Is that terribly disrespectful, Mark? I don't know.
Well, there's a little bit more than that in the experience if you can dig a little deeper. I think it's very moving music. I think it's thrilling. Of course, it's influenced by Bayreuth, by Wagner. His trips to Bayreuth made an enormous impact on him, Parsifal. And from that point of view, you could say it's English Wagner, but then music after The Ring and Parsifal was so often tinged by Wagner, and his influence was so powerful. But it's one of his greatest works.
Well, the full performance of Elgar's The Kingdom, along with the other pieces being reviewed tonight, can be found in the Proms Extra Collection on the BBC iPlayer, should you want to relive those moments again. But we're not quite done with The Kingdom, because it's time for David Owen Norris and his Chord of the Week. Our series wouldn't be complete without his weekly dissection of a chord, would it? We would be chordless, and that simply wouldn't do. His chord this week is from The Kingdom.
Well, there's our chord of the week, and it's an unexpectedly jazzy one for a sacred work. You'd think it would be more at home. Ooh. But there it is. How has Elgar come up with that chord? Back in Tudor times, they liked to follow this note that falls with this note that rises. They sound a bit odd one after the other, and in fact they called them false relations. But an ending that used those false relations was so popular in England that it was called the English cadence. And it comes out of those old musical scales that we call the church modes. And what Elgar's done, instead of putting his false relations politely in two separate chords, he stuck them both at once in one and the same chord. So he's created a sort of moody blues chord that drags the English cadence kicking and screaming into the 20th century. It's an extension of an ancient musical language that everyone can understand. And Elgar's chosen to do it at the very moment in his oratorio where the Holy Spirit has given the apostles the gift of tongues, an extension of human language that everyone can understand. You can just imagine Elgar in a jazz club, cigar and a cocktail. And then our chord of the week would finish that off very nicely.
Absolutely brilliant. David Owen Norris is back next week with another chord. We have lots more still to come here on Proms Extra, including a performance by pianist Haotian Zhang, who played with the China Philharmonic Orchestra, of whom more later. Plus, we're going to have an interview with the incomparable Jessie Norman too. Now, though, to an orchestra and their departing principal conductor, who brought the house down. After 19 years with the Tonhalle Orchestra Zurich, the American conductor David Zinman brought this very successful partnership to a rousing close last week at the Albert Hall. Beethoven, Dvorak and Strauss were featured in the concert. And first we're going to turn to Beethoven. It was his Pastoral Symphony, a work inspired by the composer's love of nature and the great outdoors. And Eric, Beethoven and the countryside, it doesn't get much better, does it?
It doesn't get much better. I'm always struck with this piece especially in that, its premiere was arguably one of the most famous classical concerts in the history of classical music. I think it was for a 4-hour-long concert, and not only was the 6th premiered on it, but the 5th was premiered just following, and selections from the C minor Mass, and I think the entire choral fantasy. The musicians were under-rehearsed, the audience was freezing, and Beethoven soldiered on. Which, in my mind, I'll always think of Beethoven in that moment. It's sort of, he has so much to say and really isn't that concerned with whether or not anyone's comfortable hearing all of it. And what I love about the 6th is that it takes you on this long walk with him. And I feel by the end, you feel like you've spent some time with the man himself.
Well, let's hear just a smidgen of the Pastoral Symphony, conducted by David Zinman with the Tonhalle Orchestra Zurich. First performed at the Proms in 1895. That was Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, and I think the countryside never sounded quite so good. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about David and his relationship with the Tonhalle in a moment, but let's talk about the music first. And Imogen, I suppose the only challenge with a piece like the Pastoral Symphony is that everybody knows it so well. Yes. How do you approach a really well-loved work like that?
You have to go back to the score and you have to try and imagine how it would have sounded like at a first performance, as Eric is saying. How extraordinary it would have seemed, how, you know, the depiction of birds and storms and all these things must have been a huge surprise, probably particularly if badly played. About this work, there is such transparency of orchestration and such originality and tenderness about it and love. You've just got a big smile on your face most of the time. But you have to look at the score again and think, what is it that made Beethoven write this phrase rather than that phrase, and what does it say to me? And then, untrammeled, you've just got to push that out there, you know, from the depth of your heart. And
that's right.
For me, that's the only way.
To trust your instincts.
Yes.
Have faith in your own musical response, and don't think for a moment that it's ever been heard before. I quite often say to my lovely orchestra in Manchester, play this tune as if you've never heard it before, and they look at me as if saying, come on. But it makes a difference if you can make everybody think afresh and have fresh energy and fresh concentration, and their instincts come through. And this is a wonderful example of that.
And do you approach it with a big smile on your face, as Imogen suggested?
When it's good. Yeah. But the decision really, I think, is the sort of sound, Katie, that you want from this music. And every conductor has a slightly different view. And it's one of the things that's really changed in the last, I think, 30 years.
Because of the period instrument movement.
Absolutely.
And I found that to be so interesting and so incredibly useful, because to hear swifter string sounds, you know, harder timpani sticks, natural horns, faster tempi, it all sounds much more raw and actually more shocking. And I think even with a modern day orchestra, one can bring that right in and bring one's own knowledge to bear.
You really can make a different sound,
It's completely different to the slightly cushy sounds that you and I might have been brought up with.
That were
Not
prized.
you, because you're so young, Eric.
Hardly.
I feel that it leaps off the page the later at night it is.
Really?
Yeah, when, you know, like at midnight. And I open a score, particularly of music as edgy as Beethoven is, as thrusting, as aspirational. When it's quiet outside and it's dark, the sounds leap off the page, you know, they really do. And there's something so gritty and vivid about it that is so contrary to the way I was brought up to hear this music.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the music at that particular concert, because it wasn't just the Beethoven. We went to some Dvorak then as well. We had the violin concerto in A minor. Let's take a little look at this particular work as performed by the wonderful Julia Fischer. Julia Fischer there performing with the Tonhalle Orchestra, and she earned some great press reviews for that performance, as indeed the whole concert did. Let's talk a little about Julia's performance, because one of many of the great soloists we're going to be discussing this season. Imogen, tell us about performing as a soloist at the Proms.
Oh, well, it's completely wonderful. I rather envy her being a violinist, quite apart from being the violinist that she is, because one can look out at the audience as a violinist. I'm fated to look only at one corner of the hall, which probably for concentration is perhaps quite a good thing. Incidentally, you do know about Julia that she's also an extraordinary pianist.
She should get her
She
on.
is, and she has, I think actually, am I right, Mark? She has done concerts whereby she's played a violin concerto in the first half and a piano concerto in the second half.
Oh, well, that is just showing
and
off,
a
isn't
serious
it?
piano concerto too. I mean, some big virtuoso stuff. How many people can do that? I don't know. She's a phenomenal player, very classical, very cool, and I don't mean that in any derogatory way. She just is completely on top of everything that she does and is not thrown by the occasion at all. She sounded beautifully inspired by it.
But working in that particular instance, Mark, with this wonderful orchestra, the Tonhalle, under David Zimmerman, who I know you followed him, I believe, at the Rochester Symphony Orchestra, is that right?
Yes, in New York, Rochester, New York.
Yes, so a wonderful partnership.
Yes, this has been so successful, and it's so lovely that David's been one of the music directors to stay And I think that's such a wonderful part of working with orchestras, is to develop a relationship that goes on over a number of years. And I've worked with them over the last few years myself. And they're a marvellous performing orchestra. Some energy comes that you haven't felt at all in rehearsal. And I think this is related to the remarkable hall, the Tonhalle. It's not a large hall, but it's large enough for all the music that they play fabulously well. And it has a marvellous atmosphere between the public and the players. And I've enjoyed my work with them enormously. I've got great admiration for them.
Will it be a real wrench for David, do you think? Is it hard when you have to leave an orchestra behind?
Tell me about it. Yeah, it's incredibly hard. Because, of course, if you've had good music making, that brings with it a certain personal contact. And there's so much more to being a music director than just conducting the concerts. It's thinking about the long view, about how an orchestra should develop over a period of 10 years. It's thinking about the relationship with the public, being a part of the community, all that sort of thing. And David is brilliant at all that.
Well, if you go to the BBC iPlayer, you can find the concerto we've just been listening to, the Dvorak and the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony as well, complete in the Proms Extra collection. It's just like having your Christmas gifts arrive early, I promise you. And speaking of gifts, just a few days ago, Proms Extra met an operatic singer who has sung for royalty and for presidents. Her voice has been described as opulent and rich, but quite frankly, that doesn't do her justice at all, because she is quite simply a living legend. Jessie Norman has worked with all of the classical greats, including Mark Elder and Imogen Cooper. And she was in London to promote her autobiography, and she dropped by the Royal Albert Hall to talk to us about her love of the proms and to explain what it really means to be a diva.
We have sort of roller skaters in America that are called divas, you know, so anybody that's meant to sort of excel at something and be a little bit sort of difficult, sort of in doing so, is meant to be called a diva. And then if someone wants to say that a person is a diva because they show up at rehearsals prepared, or on time for rehearsals, or is really interested in a rehearsal rather than a run-through, if that is meant to be diva behavior, guilty. The first time that I ever sang in London was at the Royal Albert Hall on the last night of the Proms. I had no idea, of course, of the last night of the Proms. I didn't know that it was so special and that it was very different from the way that concerts normally happen in London. And I thought, when I saw thousands of people standing and everybody seemed to be in such a good mood, I said, they really understand how to do concerts in London. This is really very good. The rest of the world should take notice. It is an amazing space. The mad promenaders. Some of them are really quite mad. They have signs that they hold up so that you can see. I'm interested in many different things, and certainly within the classical canon, many different composers. And so the music of Stravinsky is just as interesting and is beloved by me as the music of Mozart. I love the music of Duke Ellington. I love the music of George Gershwin. And for me, these are all wonderful composers, and so therefore I choose to sing them. But I love to be able to see the audience and their reaction and the joy that they show in being there. I have very often the feeling within a performance that I sometimes would like to stop and say, do you realize, audience, how much fun I'm having here? There have been many occasions when I've wanted to say, this is just great, let's just do that again.
It's wonderful to hear from Jessie Norman there, and I know that Imogen and Mark, you've both worked with her. We heard her being, frankly, quite pithy at the top there about her not being a diva at all, or if she is, guilty. What was she like to work with?
I found her lovely. She knew very clearly what she wanted. We were performing some Strauss songs at the Wigmore Hall in the context of a memorial concert for her beloved pianist Geoffrey Parsons. I felt most privileged to be taking part. She was very courteous, very warm. She knew exactly what she wanted, and I was trying to comply as best as I could. She didn't always keep to it exactly in the concert, but that's entirely her prerogative. I remember I hit a chord on a little bit before a high note of hers and just wanted to sink into the ground, but she was so gracious about it after. And she's just so charismatic to be near this incredibly warm presence and this glorious, glorious voice. It's not something I shall forget, I have to say.
So Mark, what was your experience?
Daunting. It was some years ago. We did two different things together, one at a memorial service actually in Westminster Abbey. We sang together the Dido's Lament from Purcell's Dido. And it's a pity, isn't it, that the word diva has become so pejorative that we all use it in assuming that it's somebody who behaves badly, because it means a goddess. And in that sound, one gets nearer a goddess than with most people. There is something extraordinary, something that I imagine for her it must be so difficult to always know the way the phrase is going to come out. And I found in the performances I had to be very, as Imogen is implying, ready for anything. Not that it was any way willful. With some divas it can be. But with Jessie, one felt it was inspiration. One felt that she was the conduit through which this incredible sound was rolling out. Remarkable.
And Eric, as a completely unbiased American, what is it about that wonderful voice that makes her stand out as a singer?
Well, to me, that's the quintessential American voice. It's free and bold and confident and warm, and it's funny her being a diva. Certainly I don't think being a diva, as Mark was saying, in the pejorative is justifiable, but I absolutely think it's understandable. Because for singers, they've got an experience like no one else has to deal with. Their voice, their body is their instrument, and they have to stand up there, sometimes 70, 80, 90 other people on stage that they're competing against. And the target is on them. And I think you're surrounded by either sycophants or horrendous critics. And I don't know that it's armor necessarily, but in order to make your way through that world with grace, I think you probably develop pretty tough fists.
Let's turn from an international artist to the plethora of international orchestras travelling from all over the world to perform at the Royal Albert Hall this season. Last week, the China Philharmonic made its debut Proms appearance and featured two soloists, Hao Zhang, who will be performing on Proms Extra later, and the British trumpeter Alison Balsam, who performed a new concerto especially composed for her by Chigang Chen. And just before its world premiere in Beijing in early July, Alison flew out to face the creative challenge that lay before her, and Proms Extra gave her a camera.
I felt a bit dizzy that time. I'm not sure why the last note has to be that long, but it is, so I've got to do it.
So here I am at Heathrow Airport, about to get on the plane to Beijing, feeling really up for it now because I practiced this morning until I can practice no more. So here we are, we're in Beijing. As everyone who gets off a plane in Beijing first thing in the morning, feel like death warmed up, and I think I've got my rehearsal in 2 hours with the orchestra.
The thing that scares me the most about playing brand new pieces is that you just don't know physically how demanding it's going to be until you're actually in the performance. It's taken me a few months to really realise what it is, because it's not writing that I've ever come across for the trumpet before. It's written more like a flute concerto. I think that Chigang, he's done something really stretching what we think about the trumpet, which is really wonderful. So kind of like this, and then here.
No, just this note.
Yeah, I know, but just and here and here and here.
Yeah, everywhere.
The whole piece. The thing that's most interesting to me is that it's these very well-known Chinese melodies within this Western concerto. It's a real wonderful meeting of West and East. But there are a lot of very long, sustained notes which are killers. And all instruments are difficult in their own way, but the trumpet has got to be the most physically painful. I feel kind of overwhelmed, and my head is full of the things I've got to go back to the hotel and practice because it feels so different with the orchestra.
With Chigang, I hope that he's happy because this is his dream to realise this piece. So I've just come back from dinner the night before the concert here, and Chigang Chen came. Let's do that again. And Chigang Chen came to me with the score, saying things he wanted to change and cut. So now at 12:30, just after midnight, I'm having to get the trumpet out and practice the piece just before the concert. I've just woken up and I've had a text message from the composer's publisher saying he's actually changed it again. It's fine for him to change it, but it's slightly undermining, so now I'm feeling really nervous that he's not happy, and it's a worry. It's about 10 minutes before I go on stage. I actually heard yesterday through the translator that the composer wants to reinvent the trumpet also, so I was a bit unnerved by that, but now I just have to kind of put everything else on my mind and just play. So wish me luck.
We'll talk about suffering for your art. Alison Balsam there in China. Well, I mean, to all of you, this question, I mean, was that an extreme example of working on a new piece? I mean, Imogen, you've, I know, worked on new commissions yourself.
I have. I think my most unbelievable experience was I co-commissioned a piece from Thomas Adès, and when I first got the score, I looked at it and thought, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm done for. It was a 12-minute piece and it took me 1 month to read through it.
Wow.
It was incredibly hard.
I have a soloist, a composer and a conductor on the sofa, so I don't want any fights, but who is most responsible for the delivery of that new work when it gets to that premiere?
The conductor.
How did I know you were going to say that?
The soloist.
No, wait a minute. Your question is who's
you come
responsible
in.
for
Yeah.
delivery?
Yeah.
Once the composer has finished the work and hands it over to the recreators as opposed to the creators, it's vital, and I'm sure that Eric understands this, that he hands over a certain responsibility and creativity in order that we may create it, recreate it for you.
No question.
Because without the fantasy of the performers, the piece will stay on the page.
Yes.
And to be allowed to run with the piece and to delight the composer is one of the most thrilling things. What is not thrilling is to feel that every time you do a phrase, the composer's going, oh, God, behind you. And some composers...
How do you handle it? How do you handle it
Tell
when
them
they
not
do?
to turn up.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Kick them out of hall.
Yeah, no, just say, no, please, let me do the first 2 or 3 rehearsals. Let me get into it. Let me explain what it is to the players. And then when we've got something going, please come and tell us how we're doing.
Yeah.
But if you have somebody who, and there are, I mean, we're all different, and some temperaments get very twitchy, and they get nervous and think, but it's not right. I said, no, of course I know it's not right. It's the first rehearsal. I'm doing it slower because it's hard. Go away. Come back after lunch.
The trick is, I can tell you from personal experience as a composer, that what it feels like is that you've written the most intimate secrets about yourself, things you would never tell anybody, and now you're handing it to another person and saying, please shout this as loud as you can to everyone. And they start talking about all these intimate details, and you say, no, actually, that's not at all. That's not me. That's nothing like. And so, yeah, we're not the best judges of how to build a piece of music. We want to micromanage from the beginning.
Tell me about it.
Well, listen, let's have a sneak preview of how Alison got on, because you then performed that piece here at the Prom. A genuine tour de force there from Alison Balsam, and you can watch the whole concert tomorrow on BBC4. But now I'm delighted to welcome another star soloist from that prom, Haochen Zhang, who gave a monumental performance of Liszt's First Piano Concerto. Haochen, welcome to Proms Extra. How was your Proms debut? How was it in the hall for you?
Well, you know, I've never been to the Albert Hall before, but, you know, it's like a legendary venue for all the musicians. And having watched what the hall looked like, both from outside and inside, through all kinds of medias, DVDs, TVs, and YouTube, and I find it really a special experience.
Everybody always says that the Proms audience are a particularly good audience, but you've had experience of audiences all over the world. How do they compare to your audiences in China, where I know you get treated like a rock star?
No, the marketing in China for classical music has been growing incredibly fast. And you see all kinds of concert halls, all kinds of new fancy venues opening up, and some of the highest paid orchestras in China were now in the smaller cities, and so it's really an incredible pace for classical music in China. What
do you think is going on in China with classical music? Why is it becoming such a fashion, if you like, now with the young people particularly?
Well, I think the first aspect is that it's a new thing still in China, not like in the West. It's already been a tradition. So in a way, it's sort of like a luxury trend. Same thing for how they follow up with all these luxury brands now in China. But so that's one thing. And the second aspect is that it's part of the Chinese culture, East Asian culture in general, to have the curiosity for knowledge, and they really want to learn, especially for young people. And also for the parents, they also want their kids to get, you know, educated, and they really value the future of their children. So what's phenomenal is that in the West, you always see most people, you know, sitting in the audience are either middle age or above, and you see, you know, after CD signing shows, all the people lining up, a lot of them are old people. But in China, you see all these college students wearing glasses, you know, waiting to sign and to get signed. So it's really phenomenal.
Did you study just in China yourself?
No. I was born and raised in Shanghai until 11. Then I went to another city in Shenzhen, which is also a quite big city, for about 4 years. But I went to the States since I was 15 and stayed in Philadelphia until now. Yeah.
At Curtis?
Yeah, at Curtis. Yes. But I've been going back regularly to China. Yeah.
Because Mark, I know you work a lot in China. Are you finding it an exciting place to perform?
I do. I've been 3 times, and once to conduct the China Philharmonic. And I met Long Yu, and he's an incredible man, isn't he?
Yes.
I mean, the energy that man has to help classical music in China is extraordinary.
Yes,
isn't it?
Yeah, and he has this incredible charisma. Yeah.
He has done so much for music in your country, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he fights for it, doesn't he? And okay, he has 2 orchestras now, doesn't he? Is that right?
3 orchestras.
Sorry, 3. Yes.
3, the China Philharmonic, the Shanghai Symphony, and also the Guangzhou Symphony. All 3 are the biggest orchestras in China.
Wow.
So he's really sitting in the saddle. I mean, it's amazing. And I enjoyed so much working with the players. And it was fascinating seeing how the different generations were building up an awareness of quality in the orchestra. I found everybody so smiley.
Yeah, which is always must be very nice when you're standing on the podium in front of a new band.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us to talk to us a little bit before we hear you perform Haochen Zhang. And I know you need to go and get ready to play the show out now. But before we hear him play here, here's a sneak preview of the Liszt, which you'll be able to see in tomorrow night's concert. Haochen Zhang performing with the China Philharmonic Orchestra, and do watch out for a couple of very special encores in that programme. Right, that is almost it for this week's Proms Extra, but before we go, there's no end of Proms action this week with something for everyone, including the teenies, with the CBeebies prom. And if you're wondering how to experience the Proms yourself, do remember that all the Proms are broadcast live on Radio 3. You can watch concerts on BBC 4 on Thursday, Friday and Sunday evenings, and you can find this episode and the featured works in the Proms Extra collection on the BBC iPlayer. And of course, there's the BBC Proms website to satisfy all your other classical needs. That's bbc.co.uk/proms. And that is it for this evening. I'll be back next week with Proms Extra favourites Daniel Hope, Stephen Huff and a performance by the Heath Quartet. Many thanks to my guests tonight, to Imogen Cooper, Eric Whittaker and Sir Mark Elder. And to the pianist Haochen Zhang, who will now close the show with music by the Argentinian composer Ginastera. Goodbye.